Good morning and welcome to Embracing Change, Talking Through Trauma. And today my guest is Lauren Thompson, and she is a Pilates instructor, a counselor, and a community activist. Welcome, Lauren. Thank you for taking the time today to meet with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. I'm excited to get to talk with you today.
Yeah. So our topic today, a few weeks ago, you wrote an article entitled Fat. Can you tell us just a little bit about how, where, what prompted you to write this article, I guess is where I want to start.
Well, a lot of things. So I have a history, professional history of working with eating behaviors and body size biases. So I've got a long history, close to 15 years now, of working on with that topic. But with Pilates Intel, I'd written two articles previous to that, and they all are each one kind of inspired the next one. So before Fat, I had written an article called Junk Fitness. And the response to that, because part of that article, really what I was talking about was the incorporation of junk values into the fitness realm, which I feel are very prevalent. And part of that junk value is valuing thinness. And when I wrote about that in the junk fitness article, there was quite a bit of pushback that inspired. And from the pushback, I could see in the comments a sort of inherent obesity bias, an inherent fat bias. So I was like, well, I need to write about this next. I need to hit this head on. And the timing of that article, I kind of realized it was going to come out late February, early March. And I was like, that's like the intersection of Black history and women's history months. And so I was like, this is great timing. So I really wanted to talk about that obesity bias. A lot of times obesity bias is only talked about under the lens of sexism. At least, and especially in my professional career of looking at this topic, a lot of times it's just looked at sexism, very much looking at white women's experience with it. And I think that racism bit is incredibly important. And I talk about the book, it might be backwards, but the Fearing the Black Body book. And really that was my first time getting a good understanding of why did this even happen in the first place? Where did this come from? Because it is very bizarre. I think it's a bizarre, all biases, all of these isms are bizarre, but the body size bias is just very bizarre. It's very weird. And she talks about it in the book about how, a century ago, that bias went the other way. There was an extreme bias towards thin women, that they weren't healthy, that they needed to eat more and plump up. And it just wasn't, we're on this pendulum swing that we've now gone the other way. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers that question.
No, it did. And I think that, no, you did answer. I think that also, when we talk about the book, I found it very ironic that we would both highlight the same areas in the book.
Yeah.
When it talks about, it was just, I thought it was very, very interesting as I do it. And of course I can't find my page right now.
That page 8.
Yeah, I got
following along in the book.
Yeah. But it was talking about prominent feminist scholars and they fear of the fat but the glorification of thinness first gained widespread appeal in the United States. I mean, it was really, I think because I didn't have a chance to read, I skimmed the book and I went back and forth through it. And it's very, believe me, I will be reading.
Yeah, so, it's more of a textbook book. So it's not a narrative book. It's, you're reading Wikipedia, a very good Wikipedia, but it's definitely a book to, like I read it in small doses. Like I would read it also because it's emotionally difficult information to get through, especially for me. It's just, she talks about how the size bias, she has a great quote. I wonder if I can find it. I think I have it in my paper. Look at my article for the better quote, but my like summarization of the quote was basically like, the size bias is a way to control white women so that we can maintain this racial hierarchy.
Yes.
And I think it's just a interesting emotion. Interesting isn't the right word. It's an emotional place as a white woman to deal with this like almost paradox of this thing has existed in my life that has, created pain for me. And because of that, it's also put me at a higher position that like subjugates these other women. Like it's just a really difficult thing to work through. So I read the book like in pieces. I wanted to get through it. I wanted to know the information. I was like hungry for more, but I knew I needed to like read a little bit and sit with it and process it and then go and read more. So that's my recommendation on reading it. And highlight like Nobody's Business so you can go back, because there's so many little bits that I like go back to all the time.
Well, and the other point that she brings up that I think is really important, because kind of like you, like I worked with within low income families for more than 25 years. With my focus was on trauma, but what I saw was still like when we talk about like nutrition, and we talk about in the correlation and how it goes back to obesity and things like that, or the lack of money, or the food deserts within like especially inner city places and those kind of things. But she says in this part, she talks about the attitudes and more impact on elite and white women more than on men, working class, or people of color. And I just thought it still goes back to the things that she's saying right there. And this book was written, but she's laying this out from a century or more of stuff. And so this has been, and it's not just something that's like just cropped its head up and just shown up late, early right now. But I think that when you look at the role that white women have played in this, to me, it's almost degrading it to a certain point for myself, or it really, and I feel it's my responsibility to have a better understanding of where this is coming from, so I can first and foremost be educated and be able to address it from my standpoint. So my biases or lack of them, I should say, I've been able to address my own self first before I can do anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because, I've always been, on the, what I'm going to say, the thinner side, but I've also had an eating disorder that has taken me years and years to get a handle on it, and wondering how much of that, because of the cultural values, really played into, because I'm going to be honest, it was something I inherited from my mother. And, you wonder how all of those things all play together. So, yeah. But what do you feel are some of the, because you pointed out in your article, like talking about like in relation, and I think that it's important because like we're both Pilates instructors, and it's like we know that women of different sizes and shapes and colors have not always been welcome in some studios because of I don't want to use the word studio, because Pilates instructors have had the lack of knowledge, or they have had their own biases around whatever they've they've had, but how do you feel that this has played into the Pilates industry or the fitness industry?
So I think that the Pilates industry, I think, is unique in that there's a lot of overlap with the dance world.
Yeah.
And like eating disorders are rampant in the dance. Like that is what it is. Yeah. The dance world is a world based on, there's a certain expectation of accepting abuse if you're in the dance world.
Yeah.
Period. And so that bleeds into the Pilates world 100%. Sorry, let me get Gregor's here. Okay, we'll see how he does.
All right.
So I think, there's that I don't know that we've really dealt with that in Pilates. There's just a lot feeding into that. There's the racism, there's definitely sexism, there's this size bias. To me, it all boils down to,
Oh yeah.
to me, it's all about control. We talk about control in Pilates as like its main, there's this paradox of it. A lot of us enjoy Pilates because we're building control of our bodies, right?
Yeah.
We're building awareness to gain control. But there is a limit to the benefit of that. Hold on. Wrong again. So kind of going back to what I was talking about with the quote from her book that, we're controlling white women to try and reinforce these hierarchies. There is a limit on the control. And I think Pilates is probably one of the worst at that in the fitness industry. Yoga, I think, has a little bit more space for, I don't know, existing. I haven't experienced that sort of like perfectionism, need for control that is in the Pilates world nearly as much as I haven't experienced that in the other form, like weightlifting. Like there are people that want to do it well and that are athletes, but it's just, it's like prevalent at such a low level in the Pilates industry that doesn't exist elsewhere. And I'm not sure it's great. I hate to, or I'm hesitant to use this word, but I find it a little neurotic. Like it's problematic. And I think, but I feel like with our current way, like there's this wave of teachers right now that I think that are dealing with it. And that's nice to see. It's sort of refreshing and, trying Pilates to me, a lot of it in the previous 10 to 15 years was about precision, like absolute precision, always going for that, knowing you would never get there, working towards an ideal. And I think that mindset just sets you up for all sorts of negative mental health experiences.
And yeah,
what's closed I think just that inherently is what has turned a lot of groups of people off from Pilates. Like if you're not, this is the ideal we're holding. So if you're not that, then,
that's where the Pilates police come in. But I think there's been a lot of pushback from, and there's a lot more people that are being much more vocal about body size and body shape. And
I feel like my article came out, maybe my attention's just on it more. I don't think so though, because my attention's been on it, but article came out, and I feel like, especially in the last 2 weeks, it's just like, vroom, like all of a sudden, all these people are talking about it, not because of my article necessarily. It's just like, energies have aligned or something. And it's just really coming to the forefront, which is like, oh, it's really refreshing to see. I've been working on this topic for 15 years, not particularly vocally, but in research and with my counseling. It's just been a topic that has been of interest for me for 15 years. So it's been interesting to watch the change, especially. So my like initial interest with it was more with like medical field and how patients are treated and their level of care depending on their weight size. And it's been interesting to see, even like in the medical field, there's a shift. I'm pretty sure we're going to see BMI no longer being used.
Yep.
Yeah, it'll be, I can tell it's happening. I think BMI is going to go out the window. I think that they're going to hopefully start using some other forms of measuring people's body size.
But I also think too that it's interesting that you say like the connection between body size and how they're treated within the medical community. And it's really, I mean, obviously for some women, it can be really, I mean, I'm just going to say can be really traumatizing for people to go and be treated poorly by somebody who's a medical profession, and you think that they're there to support you. And in reality, they're there to be critical of you or not listen to you at all. And I think that that's really, people are starting to take a stance against that as well, and seeking what I'm just going to say alternative, not necessarily all of them, but I'm just going to say there are people that are seeking alternative kinds of alternative kinds of services. Let's just put it that way. So,
yeah. I mean, I can speak from my own experience that I'm, I guess what you would call thin passing if you looked at me, but my weight has put me in the overweight or obese category my entire life. So I have had so many doctor interactions of them just looking at my chart, expecting to see something when they see my weight. And I've had some terrible interactions with doctors, absolutely horrendous. And I'm not by any means, like, I carry a privilege of how I look is different than what I weigh. And I can say that it's a horrible experience. I'm very careful about who I go to see for a doctor. I screen them like crazy. I remember with, by my second pregnancy, luckily I'd gotten a little bit more like, a little bit stronger. And I had a care provider who was just like, well, you can only gain 10 pounds this pregnancy, and that you should try walking. I'm like, really? And I remember I just was like, well, I climbed the Himalaya mountains during my first pregnancy. Do you think that's enough walking, or do you think I need to up it from there? And she just was like, couldn't even, like, that just, she couldn't even comprehend that I could like do any, she just saw a number on a chart and just assumed certain things. Like, it's just, it's exhausting. So yeah, medical world needs some help, and Pilates world is not that, I mean, we're just really not that different. I mean, some of the response I got from my article was like, well, my class is really advanced, so I don't think fat people could keep up. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous, that's just a ridiculous premise. There's a lot of people that couldn't do, for various reasons, there's a lot of people that can't do all of the Pilates moves, period. And it doesn't have anything to do with their like value or their strength. Like, just because you can't do one move in Pilates doesn't mean you're not a strong person. And I don't mean like internally, I mean like physically strong. And assuming that all fat people are beginners at physical activity is also ridiculous. It's just, yeah.
That's really interesting because when you think about like people like genetics and other things as well, but I have a number of clients that I see privately that fall into the categories that you're talking about, and they are strong. And some of them don't want to try because of fear. There's other limiting beliefs that can come into play with that. But for Pilates for Pilates instructors to make assumptions like that, to me, it's calling. And I say this because I have posted a few different things and talking about really examining biases, your biases. And these are things that we don't learn in teacher training. Now, you learned them in college, and I learned them in all the stuff that I've done over the years as well. And I taught, what it's like to talk about your own biases. And so I don't think that the subjects are going to go away anytime soon until people begin to start looking in the mirror at themselves and saying, where are my biases? And if I don't know, maybe begin to examine them, but also listening to people who are like experts like you in this field and saying, and again, it goes back, your doctors looked at you and based on like your numbers on the chart, didn't ask you what your physical level of activity was. I think that there's a lot to be said.
Even more than that, like that chart had a full blood panel. It had all sorts of information on my health that was like, this person's in great health, except there's a weight number that, that's all that mattered. And so, it's just, yeah, it's ridiculous. So I'm really excited for this. I'm excited that we're in this place, not just for our industry, but the medical field is really going, oh, we may have made some mistakes.
Yeah.
So like I talk about it a little bit in the article, how did we, and actually it's in the book as well, talking about which research articles we chose to focus on to build this narrative.
Yeah.
That being fat meant you're unhealthy. It's just sort of, it shouldn't be surprising to anybody that works in this, but we didn't focus on that. And a lot of it had to do with, a lot of it, I don't want to bash, I'm not media bashing, just to make this clear, but a lot of it did have to do with media and what they chose to focus on. They see, and this happens in research, researchers don't get to control what news outlets decide they want to focus on. So a news outlet sees a research thing, they give a snippet of it that isn't really encompassing the full article, and then they just go. And that has absolutely happened with the obesity research.
Well, you quote an article in here, obesity kills more Americans than we thought. And I thought it was really interesting because broken down by gender and race, claiming that Black women were most effective. However, the study also encountered previous studies that showed Black women with elevated BMIs had lower risk of illness and death. I just think that and then you go on to say that several leading scientists questioned and challenged the validity of the master's work, but those efforts were met with little recognition. And it's like, they're trying to show that especially wasn't, and I think I went on to read also, like when I was talking about obesity and comparing to women, or like the obesity and death rate, and like looking at like thinner white people. Am I correct in talking about this, Lauren?
So far, I think so.
Yeah. So where there was like the incidence of, you would think that there would be higher disparities among people who were higher BMI and all these other things, but in reality, it was really not that much of a difference.
Yeah. So that the original article, I can't, sorry, my brain's not working.
Okay. No, it's all right.
than we think. Like part of the peer review attacks were that the math was wrong. And and that was not, that was met with a bunch of people. I mean, it's sort of amazing how much people want to like defend this island of obesity bias. There were a number of PhDs that are like expert at like their realm is stats. That's their thing, and they were running the numbers on this thing and going, this is not like you ran your stats wrong. I think that so there in my article I put in another source, and so that original article hasn't been pulled, but there's now like a footnote of it's been not redacted, but that publication has come out and said like, well, maybe this article wasn't completely accurate, but it's way after the fact and the damage has already been done.
Yeah. But one of the things, the way I like the way you ended the article where you talked about steps that you can take to working on your own biases toward fat people. And I like the very first one where you say avoid, if not completely omit, all types of marketing and programs geared toward weight loss. And I think that that is so big that, I, as a studio owner, I had a girl today and I said, you know what? There's this nutritionist I know, you need to talk to her. I'm not a nutritionist. I don't, that's not my area of expertise. That's just how I put it. But
yeah, well, even I would say, so from my like 15 years of work on this, most doctors by far, and a lot of nutritionists are also not well equipped to deal with this. Yeah. Because everybody thinks it's like eat less, do more, and that's enough. And I don't even want to, or that'll do it. And that's not accurate. But you really have to, and this is where it's difficult. You need to find a nutritionist that like understands this full world. You can be exercising all the time, eating, really healthy, nutritious food and not lose weight and stay exactly the same size. Mm-hmm. And that is actually extremely common. So, there's another ism that goes with all of this, and it's healthism. And I don't know if you're familiar with that ism, but healthism, the premise of that is that your health is a sign of morality, and that it is purely your responsibility to maintain that. It is an individual's responsibility to maintain that. And we see that all the time, this idea of if you're sick, it's your fault. If and the moralism we see a ton it's the basis of the obesity bias, that because, so first we're like, if you're fat, you're unhealthy, which is inaccurate. And because you're fat and unhealthy, it's your fault because you're lazy, because you're gluttonous, because you're all these immoral things. So the healthism is an important part of why or what's feeding this bias. And a lot of that is like related to Protestantism and Protestant values that are a part of the American work ethic. All right, that's another lecture course we'll have another day.
Yeah. Actually, that's a really good one. And then it was also talk about promoting body diversity in your marketing. And I have to say to you that through the work that you and I have done with Chantel Lopez and Ann Bishop, with the exposure to Kasha and UDL Design, and it's really made me look at how I have advertised, and am I meeting, like looking at it from all angles. And it's really been very eye-opening for me to step back or even look at other people's advertising or marketing aspects of it. So
yeah, but I know when I opened my studio, I was very Our initial photo shoot, I was like, I was very intentional, and I did not put a thin person on our website. I put a very athletic person. I assure you, she is strong AF and extremely athletic, and she was our front person. And I just remember getting comments from clients. They're like, oh, you really should be using like I mean, like, it's not just us, like our client, it's a hard thing to fight. I had clients saying like, you should use more like model types, who are like really lean and like cut to help like motivate people. And I'm like, well, that's not going to happen. I mean, like, this is, when you choose to go down this path, you just have to kind of accept that you're pushing against a big like monster here. It takes a lot of like, well, I guess maybe I could get more clients if I was using, your standard photo models and all that, but I don't think it's worth it to continue this system. So I'm not doing it.
Well, and I think that, it's really been, like I said, from a marketing standpoint, it was really eye-opening for me, but it also made me realize for my own business morals and standards that I didn't want to promote that. So,
yeah,
but yeah, so,
I think it's just interesting, part of my, like, I've been interested in this for a while. I just think it's interesting to me what people just have programmed in their brain on what is strength, what is health. We have a very specific body type in mind with that. The fact that I can put my friend up, who is one of the most athletic people I've ever known, and people just do not see that when they see that image. Like, it's just ingrained that that's not what that is. We have to change that. We have to change that for everybody's sake. Yeah.
I mean, I absolutely 110% agree. And I think the other piece too, Lauren, that is really interesting is, and it's an ism, because it's like looking at, I don't even like to use the word, but I'm going to, just because I have actually been myself, but ageism. And it's like looking at the strength or lack of strength with women as they age. And it's been, I'm just going to say, it's been very interesting the past probably 2 years for me, because, people find out how old I am, and it's like, no, I'm not. I am more active now than I have been in probably the last 15 years, but I'm also, to look at me, I'm strong, but it's not, and I'm not saying that to be vain. I'm saying it to, because 90% of my clientele is probably women between 55 and 70. And they're coming to get stronger. Mm-hmm. And they're all relatively healthy. So
yeah, I think that interaction of ageism with sexism. Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited. I think that I feel like that one's gonna get the spotlight on it next. I'm seeing a bunch of stuff on like Instagram related to ageist stuff, and it's exciting. It's good, especially like, I am so relieved that these things are coming up. I'm wrapping up my 30s, going into my 40s, and I'm just really glad it's a different landscape than what it was 20, 30 years ago. Yeah, relieved.
Well, I hope that I can help pave the way for you, because I'm very vocal about it, because it's like people just need to look and be healthy and stop looking at the number on the scales to define who you are when it comes to, as you're embracing yourself. And so
I always like to tell my clients, I'm like, would you use a ruler to tell me what your IQ is? Like, it's not like, a ruler is a good measurement for what it is, but you're applying it to something that is not I'm sure there's I don't know this. I'm sure I can work out a correlation between height and intelligence, but I think we can all know that there's absolutely no causation with that. So
but again, but I think though that was so ingrained even 30 years ago, where the weight, the number on the scale dictated like how you, I mean, it just dictated a lot of different things. So to get people out of that loop in defining who they are and what they are based on their body shape and body size. So, and going into eating disorders is a whole nother issue that we're not going to talk about today, though. But
another day.
Yeah, that's exactly. So one of the other things that I liked that you said was watch your words. Do you say ever, and I'm going to say to you, you use the words feeling fat. What does that statement usually instigate?
Are you asking that? Are you asking that?
No, that was a question that you posed in the article. And it's like working on normalizing the word fat. Things can be tall, short, skinny, or fat are merely a deceptor. Stop using words obese to describe people. And it's a specific medical, it's just like, it was just like looking, and I always say that language matters a whole lot, and how we talk and how we interact with people. And it's like, that was a very good point is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And I'm happy to run through those. So let's start with the one where I say, stop using the word obese to describe people. Because when you hear me talk about the topic, you'll hear me go back and forth between using obesity versus fat. So I personally am comfortable with using the term obesity when I'm talking about it in a medical context. So when I'm talking about it in the context of research or that, I am not comfortable calling a person obese.
No.
There's just a lot of baggage that goes, I mean, what I said, it's a medical description. It's this medicalization, over medicalization of people's lives. And it's a medical term that has come to mean that there is something inherently sick about you because of your body size. No. So using that in a sort of day-to-day is not okay. And there's plenty of people that have written more on that if you're curious about that, you can go read more. And then the feeling fat. So yeah, on the one hand, I'm saying stop using obese, use the word fat, but then what do you mean when you say I'm feeling fat? And so for most people, when they're saying that, they're saying they're feeling sluggish, they're feeling, lazy. They're feeling bloated because they feel like they've been lazy, something along those lines. They're usually, when people use that word, I'm feeling fat, it is not merely being used as a descriptor, it's being used as a negative connotation.
Negative self-talk too.
Negative self-talk, yeah. So, I want you to use the word fat, but not like, I don't want you to use it in a way where you're packing the baggage on with it. One of the people I follow who is fantastic, she's a PhD out of New York, and she works on body positive talk. And so she's like, you just, body positive talk for parents, because I'm like personally hell-bent on making sure my kids don't absorb this stuff. But she's just like, you've got to use the word fat just like you would use to say something's tall. And her recommendation was like, when you're at the farmer's market and you're like looking at different produce, you're like, wow, this is a really fat squash, and this is a really skinny squash, and this is a really tall squash. Like, that's how you start to neuter that term. I'm not putting morality on the squash. I'm not putting all this baggage on all these different squash. There's just different sizes. And that's what it is. And trying to get there. Now, of course, all of this is like footnoted with, It depends on the person that is in front of you. You know, what I wouldn't recommend a teacher just saying to her client, like, oh, well, you're fat. Like, I wouldn't do that. You know, like, you've got to read your client. You got to build a relationship with them first before you really say any of these kind of terms. But yeah, it's just very loaded. There's a lot of, you know, I know you work in trauma. So like, if you have somebody on your reformer who's fat, they probably have experienced trauma because of their body size. And so you need to be extremely mindful of being a safe place for them.
Exactly.
Or if you can't be, if you do have, like, if you're really reacting to everything that's coming out of my mouth today and are like getting really defensive about it, you might need to not teach fat people. You might not be a safe place for them. And that's part of like that bias work is maybe I'm not the right person for this group of people.
And I think but it is, but I really think I think that it's very, very important that we talk about it. And a few weeks ago, I had Rachel Piper and June Hall on, and they were talking about all body shapes and sizes. And Rachel actually is writing curriculum to work with larger bodied women or how about just larger bodied people? I shouldn't say women, larger bodied people. But I've really learned a lot from working with my clients that are larger bodied women, because I have never, I haven't had one man, but it's been a long time. Anyways, to ask them, you know, does this feel okay? And if it doesn't feel okay, what can I do? Like props and things like that. But again, it's really, it's just so critically important because inclusivity is really a must within Pilates. And so, but it was really, it's been an eye-opening experience. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I mean, it's like when I started talking about trauma, you know, we all had our own kinds of trauma, and, you know, they can go, and again, and I had people say to me, well, there's no trauma in Pilates. And I'm like, oh, well, there's people and there's trauma within the people that come to Pilates. So it's just really important that we have these kind of conversations. And yes, they're difficult, and yes, they're hard to talk about, especially if there's biases. So Lauren, yeah. I can't begin to tell you thank you enough. And I will put in the notes how to get a hold of you. So if anybody else wants to reach out to you in reference to either your articles on Junk Fitness or on your article on fat. So,
and the one before that was about paradox. So, and they all kind of, each one fed the other. So
yes. So thank you for your time today. And I really appreciate you because there's a few hours time difference for us. So I appreciate it. So, yeah. So I'm going to take us off record. So hang on just a minute. Okay. Oh,